Did she, Debbie? Okay. She didn't know she was going to be able to come. All right. Hannah, are we going? Go for it. All right. First thing I want to say tonight, Proverbs 19:24. You can look it up, but it should be on the slide as well. And it was funny. Every version had something a little different to say about this one. I thought that's interesting. Sometimes it's just a word or two, but man, there was a whole lot of, it was crazy, okay? Like the New King James and the King James says, one who has a friend has to be friendly, okay? It's just crazy. Anyway, I picked the NIV. One who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin. Some versions say one who has too many friends is going to be crushed. But I think unreliable friends, you don't want unreliable friends, do you? But there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. We've all heard that one. It's usually referred to as that's Jesus, right? But I want you to know that God wants to put friends around us that are closer than a brother, closer than a family member. How can you get closer to a family member? Well, it's easy. There's a couple of things that you need to really have a close relationship with someone. Number one is a like vision. You need a like vision, okay? You need to be able to say, this is the page I'm on, and you're on the same page, right? I had a wonderful coffee this week with a friend. And I hadn't had a coffee with this friend in a long, long time. I see him fairly often, but I haven't had coffee with him in a long, long time. And it was supposed to be a 1-hour coffee. We were going to do 1-hour coffee. 4 hours later, this person was in shorts and short-sleeve shirt, and I was putting my coat on because I was cold in the coffee shop. And we could have went for more hours. And it was so life-giving to me. All right? He didn't know that. He does now, probably, because he typically watches us online. It was so life-giving to me. It was wonderful. I was able to say and talk and do things that I hadn't said in a long, long time. I needed it. And he listened, and he shared some things that really were thought-provoking for me and for me to consider. And I've had this happen with several of you before, or we spent some time, just ministered one to another. But this was a friend who sticks closer than a brother. And I thought about it. I've pondered about that meeting and that morning. And I thought, what a great friendship that was. But I later realized it was an episode of faithfulness. That was a faithful friend. It was a faithful person. And my title today is Faithfulness. You know what those are? Balls? Someone said balls? What are they? Olives. Looks kind of like our lime tree, though, doesn't it? Except we just have one, and it won't get any bigger. I don't know what's wrong with it. Oh, the kids picked it? Well, there you go. It's a goner now. Faithfulness. Faithfulness. Now, I've got scriptures on the slides, but I'm going to give you a chance to look these up and to look at them because you need to take some notes on what I'm getting ready to share. I think you need to take some notes because you're going to chew on this at another time, some of it, okay? But leading up to today's text, which is found in Judges 9, we're going to read verses 8 and 9. Don't put it up yet. Thanks. Leading up to our text, I want to tell you about a miserable tale found in Judges, chapters 8 and 9. You should read the whole story when you get a chance. Some of you maybe have never read this, and you're going to be a little surprised by it. Some of you have read it, and you just went over it, and you didn't even think about it, all right? But here's what's going on. In chapters 8 and 9, leading up to what I'm going to read today, Gideon is now dead. Remember Gideon, mighty man of valor? Remember Gideon, great mighty warrior man, right? Israel almost immediately reverts back to their treacherous ways. I mean, like the instant he died, boom, it's like, I'm glad he's out of here. Let's do whatever we want. It's crazy. It's crazy. It's to their idolatry. Prior to his death, his victory made the people offer him the role of king. Be our king, Gideon, be our king. However, he insisted that Israel remain a theocracy instead of a monarchy. He insisted. And then he promptly went and acted like a king. No, we will not do that. And then he acted like he was the king. He amassed a fortune. He acquired royal robes and took on an ephod to consult God. Randall. He made the mistake of forming a large harem, and he began having children. Lots of children. Sons, to be exact. Gideon's ephod was what created the most difficulty. You know, the ephod they would put on to consult God. You would think that after Gideon had torn down his father's altar to Baal, he would have recognized the danger of putting something before Israel that could be served for idolatrous purposes. But he didn't. His dangerous device was formed from gold. It contained all the trappings of the ephod. His son, Abimelech, was carefully taking notice of his father's actions. He was watching like a hawk. What his father took in moderation, he took in excess. And he took Israel a long, long way down the wrong path. Abimelech. You've heard that name before? Abimelech sets himself up as an impromptu leader over his 70 brothers. 70 brothers. 70 brothers. There is a maddening, hungry ambition inside of Abimelech to be king. He is after it, big time. And he'll resort in all manner of mayhem to capture the place of rulership. He wants to be what his father once had achieved. And to eliminate the competition from his 70 brothers, did I mention there were 70? Was there not one person out of those 70 that could handle Abimelech? He hires mercenaries to go out and kill his brothers, and they manage to do that. They wreak a bloody calamity on them. All the brothers except one are slain. One named Jotham. He manages to escape, to barely escape. Jotham takes flight to Mount Gerizim, which had been a place to pronounce blessings. But on this day, the opposite would occur. He escapes, he goes there, and at kind of like an amphitheater of sorts, he climbs up the 800 feet to get to the pinnacle of this, and he uses the acoustics of this amphitheater to address Israel. He tells them a story of the trees in the forest that want a king. They approach the olive tree that turns it down. Then the fig tree that turns it down. Then the grapevine turns it down, leaving only a bramble bush to be the king over the forest. Well, the bramble is a far lesser plant than all the other trees. In fact, it's a menace. The bramble is a menace to agriculture. It's a menace to just about anything. And really, what it qualifies for is fire, to be burned. Yet it was crowned as the king of the trees. Jotham is telling this story to all of Israel. The point of his parable became clear in that all of the other brothers would have served in the role of Gideon at a much higher capacity rather than Abimelech, who had bramble bush qualities about him. But despite that speech, Abimelech became the bramble king for a very short period of time over Israel. Notice that the least qualified are generally the most ambitious. Have you ever noticed that? It is the under-equipped who often think they have the capacity and power to rule over those who really ought to be ruling over them. Small men are often the most ambitious. For what they lack in character, they make up in noise. Have you known any of these? They make up in overt displays of raw power. There's still some of those around today. Most of them are politicians. This little bramble king wouldn't last very long, though, because he would die after a three-year reign when a millstone is dropped from a tower by a woman, fracturing his skull, didn't kill him, causing him to turn to his armor bearer and say, "Run your sword through me. I don't want it to be said that I was killed by a woman." So his armor bearer pulls the sword, pierces him through, and he died. Now, that's not what my story's about today, but you needed to hear that. You should go back and read chapter 8 and chapter 9, and it'll be hopefully more interesting to you than what I just said, but now you've got some background on it, right? Today, I want to focus in on what the olive tree says during one part of this parable today. Now, finally, here's our verse. Judges 9, 8, and 9. Everybody there? The trees once went forth to anoint a king over them. And they said to the olive tree, now this is Jotham saying this to Israel, and they said to the olive tree, "Reign over us." But the olive tree said to them, "Should I cease giving my oil, with which they honor God and man, and go to sway over the trees?" That's my whole part that I want to talk about, is what he said here. There's great wisdom, in my opinion, that comes from the actions of the faithful olive tree in its reply. Our generation right now has need for faithfulness, unlike it has ever. Maybe more so now than ever. Number one. Here's my number one takeaway. Don't give in to every women urge. Our society does that. Everything that comes, every quick thing that comes, every thing that looks good and shiny. The olive tree raised a question in response to the request to be king of the trees. Here was his question. Should I? Should I? That's a wonderful response to the opportunities that life will sometimes throw in your direction. Just because the opportunity is there doesn't necessarily mean that you need to pursue it if you aren't careful. If you aren't careful, you can make a choice on a whim and it will put you 5 or 10 years behind as you try to live through the fallout of that choice. You should ask, should I? Should I? Paul said in 1 Corinthians 10:23, all things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but not all things edify. That's what I see when the olive tree said, should I? Should I? Faithfulness knows that just from being steady, that there may be pains, there may be troubles in your faithfulness that are going to be avoided if you'll be steady. There's also rewards that faithfulness understands will take place if it just remains consistently in one place. Changing horses in midstream opens up fresh temptations that you didn't even know were there. Fresh struggles, fresh doubts. Grass isn't always greener on the other side. Great blessings are gained when a man or a woman is willing to stay in the fight and work through the challenges instead of looking for an easier place to serve. I want to read you a story about the Battle of Arbela in 331 BC. It's about Alexander the Great, and he's coming up against King Darius III. And I'm going to have to read it because I don't know it well enough to recount it to you, and I don't want to miss a point. Alexander the Great worked a masterful strategy that proved to be the decisive point in the fight. The soldiers were fighting against the Persian army of King Darius III, who had an overwhelming advantage in number. Listen to this. It was 200,000 to 50,000. Darius had 200,000. That alone should have brought victory for the Persians. One of the first things that Alexander did was he allowed several of his scouts to be captured by the Persians. When the Persians began to interrogate the men, they all said the same thing. Alexander the Great is going to attack at night. Each one of them said it. He's going to attack at night. So Darius kept his entire army up all night, while Alexander allowed his men to sleep all night in preparation for the battle the next day. By the time the sun came up, the Persian army were all exhausted. They had been up all night. The second thing that Alexander did, that he did concern his battle plan. He had a battle plan, which he formed a wedge of his soldiers. He made a wedge with like a point, and it came out like a wedge, right? At the center of the formation were the foot soldiers that were very proficient with javelins. Javelins, not bow and arrows, but javelins. Once Darius saw the attack pattern, he sent 300 of his chariots forward in an effort to cut through the Grecian army. Now, these chariots were equipped with 2 men on either side of the charioteer who could fire bows. But the real danger was the long razor-like swords that were attached to their wheels. There were swords going out of the wheel. So they would pull into a group of foot soldiers and just slice them up. The Persians would race through an army and waves of soldiers, and they'd be cut down by the spinning blades. However, Alexander knew that this was the strategy that the Persians would use. And when the chariots came racing down, the javelins began and literally rain on the charioteers. It wasn't too long until the division had ground to a halt because of injury or death. Thirdly, Alexander also knew their troops were an army of mercenaries and that they had no loyalty to each other or to the king. Now, when the chariots went down, there was a great distress among the soldiers. During that hesitation, Alexander led his elite soldiers in the center of the fight, and it was almost as if the Red Sea were parting before him and his men. With the presence of his great black war horse, his flashing jewel-crusted helmet, and flowing red cape, he flung himself into the middle of the battle. By doing this, he was able to catch King Darius in the midst of the fight. Darius took to flight, running from him in panic. The battle was left to his generals, who also began to flee. When the news of this rushed through the lines, the Persians were overwhelmed and defeated by Alexander the Great. Now here's my takeaway. Because he stayed exactly where he was supposed to stay, in the middle of the fight, it paid huge dividends for him. He refused to panic in the middle of adversity, and he pressed on. You can't give in to every whim and urge that comes to you in life. You just can't. There are times you have to be like that olive tree and stand in the midst of the struggle. You will build your life to greatness when you learn to do this. You business owners, you know what I'm talking about. You have to stand. You have to fight. You can't just quit. Number 2, faithfulness equates usefulness or equals usefulness. Faithfulness equals usefulness. Not only did the olive tree ask the great question of, should I? He also added something to that. Should I cease giving my oil? Or perhaps to rephrase it would be more like, should I leave my usefulness? There's some facts about olive trees that can help us to consider the greatness of living a Christian life. Listen to this. The normal lifespan of an olive tree is from 500 to 900 years old. Did you know that? That's an old tree. I remember watching these people that were, what's those people that have that internet show and they're redoing the 1,000-year-old house and they've got some olive trees on their property, and then the time come for them to go, Luca and whatever her name is, and they go out there, and I see, for the first time, I see real olive trees that people are trying to harvest. Well, that's an ugly tree. That's not a good-looking tree. But it's hundreds of years old. You'd be looking a little rough yourself. Some have even been known to have lived 1,000 years. Wow, that's a long time. Some olive trees range in height from 10 to 60 feet, depending on the variety and the pruning process. Olive trees do not bear fruit until 5 to 8 years old and don't reach full development until 20 years old. It's like the opposite of dogs. You got a dog that's 1 year old. Yep, it's 7 years old now. No, it's 1 year. Nope, it's 7. They mature and are at full production from 35 to 150 years of age. Wow. The average tree, listen to this, produces 41 to 54 pounds of olives per year. I didn't think that's very much. Or the equivalent of 4 to 5 liters of oil per year. That doesn't sound like a lot, does it? 4 to 5 liters for a whole year? Well, you better have more than one tree. And this is why. The record for an olive tree was one that yielded 800 kilograms of olives in a single year. And this is 1,700 pounds of olives. That's a bunch. The oil is removed from the olives through a process of pressure that uses no heat or solvents. It's revered for its fragrance. The golden oil of the olive was used in ancient civilizations as a body ointment and to heal. The ancient Greeks burned olive oil in their lamps as a source of light. Now listen to this. Worldwide olive oil production last year was between 793 to 925 million gallons a year. For that year. Million gallons. Now listen to this. Worldwide olive oil consumption was between 793 to 845 million gallons a year. Pretty much so, we consumed everything they could produce, and it's rising. It's rising. I like olive oil myself. There's a lot of spiritual lessons that you can take from these facts, I believe. Faithfulness speaks of being in a place for a long time. Faithfulness speaks of serving well. Serving well. If the average tree lives for 500 to 900 years, then understand that you can be productive in a place for a long time. You can. I had someone tell me this week they got an opportunity to speak at a funeral. Not just speak, but to share the gospel and lead people in the sinner's prayer. And this person is 85 years old. you can still be fruitful, even when you've been in a place for a long time. These trees had to contend with drought, disease, pestilence, and sometimes even poor skills from the farmers. But it still remains faithful. It reminds me of what Paul said about his ministry and what he had to prevail through in 2 Corinthians 11, 25 through 27. It's on the screen. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I've been constantly on the move. I have been in danger from rivers, in dangers from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false believers. I have labored and toiled and have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have often gone without food. I have been cold and naked. Yet, not a single one of those obstacles kept him from producing olives and oil. There are times that you just have to put your foot down and refuse to move off the foundation that God has placed you on. Faithfulness means endurance. Because you're faithful, there's a usefulness that God has for your life. Your faithfulness comes first. Olive trees do not begin to bear fruit for 5 to 8 years after they've been planted. Far too often the devil tries to point out your ineffectiveness when God never intended for our lives to reach a place of production until after a sense of spiritual maturity has begun to take place. Are you spiritually mature? He's waiting on you to get there so that he can produce and produce more and produce more. If faithfulness leads to usefulness, then we have to incorporate a sense of patience when God is working out things in our own heart. Sometimes trials can teach you and me how to pray through. Without the trial, I would not ever learn how to do that. Sometimes problems can teach us how to pray through them. I have a problem, I need to pray through that problem. Sometimes trials can teach us how to worship through a trial. Sometimes dilemmas of life can be used so that God can show us lessons in His Word. Seasons of trouble can help us appreciate the seasons of blessing. Sometimes a season of drought can make us sink our roots even deeper into His Word. Just because you may not be bearing fruit on your time frame does not mean that you are not exactly on God's schedule. Don't give in to the cry of those who want to crown you king of a much lesser kingdom. If you're going to grow, if you're going to provide fruit, if you're going to bring oil to the vessel, if you're going to develop fully in your faith, if you're going to bring light to this dark generation, if you're going to bring fragrance and healing to others, you must learn the lesson of faithfulness. Be faithful. This is why you have to do as the olive tree said in the parable, I can't cease giving my oil. I can't leave my production. I can't leave my blessing. The Jerusalem Bible says this, must I forego my oil? The New English Bible says, what? Leave my rich oil? The Knox Bible says, I cannot forego this rich influence of mine. I cannot forego this rich influence of mine. If there isn't any oil that is seemingly coming from your life, stay the course. Remain faithful. In time, oil will flow out of your life. And that will astound you. As a matter of fact, I think there's been times when it has happened and you recognized it and you were astounded and then you moved on and you forgot about it. All those times God spoke through you, gave you things to say to someone. Someone's having a meltdown in front of you, like, oh, dear God, I don't want to mess with this. And then he gives you this tremendous insight that brings such comfort and healing. And you're like, wow, that was pretty cool. No, that was pretty God. That was his oil. Once the privilege of production starts flowing in your life, temptation will still be there. But you will find the upward pull of his perfection that will help you ward it off. He'll help you. Stay the course. Fight the good fight. Reach for the prize. Number 3, faithfulness means there is a focus. There's a focus. In other words, there's a reason. Resist the temptation to follow your urges and whims. Let me read verse 9 again. But the olive tree said to them, should I cease giving my oil, with which they honor God and men, and go to sway over trees? Did you catch the purpose? Did you catch the focus? With which they honor God and men, with my oil? The New American Standard Bible says verse 9 this way. But the olive tree said to them, shall I leave my fatness, with which God and men are honored, and go to wave over the trees? Don't leave the fatness of your production. Honor God and man with your sacrifice. The Hebrew for fatness is deshin, which literally means the ashes of the sacrifice. You see, the crux of the matter is this. How can I leave my sacrifice behind to attempt to work in a lesser venue? Sacrifice is very closely related to production. Matter of fact, many references in the Old Testament almost or always come back to a sacrifice of some sort. Sacrifice is very closely related to production. We have to remember who we are producing for. Who are we producing for? And it's not your employer. As long as there is breath in our lungs, let's allow Jesus to produce whatever oil he desires through us. Now, I do have to say this. Here's my disclaimer. If the Lord calls you to leave your nets, do it. If he calls you to leave your money tables, do it. If he calls you to bear a cross, and he does, do it. If he calls you to embrace self-denial, well, do it. If he calls you to give up your selfish life, do it. When you want to say, it's an impossible demand, embrace the call. When you want to say, I have other plans for my life, instead, just follow the Lord. He knows what he's doing better than you do. So let me conclude with this. Ooh, I'm burning. That's all right. When the devil, not the Lord, is trying to get you to leave where you are and seemingly go and do something seemingly better, or if he's trying to get you to throw in the towel, just tell him, no, I think I'll just stay right here. I'm not getting paid down here. I get paid when I go home. Think about And don't you ever, 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 ever think that you are alone, because you're not. Again, Proverbs 19:24 says, there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. We know his name is Jesus, but there are others called to come alongside you. As we move into 2025, we're moving into a time of decree, where we hear what God says, and we decree what God says, but we're also moving into a season of bonding, of fellowship, of family on a level that we haven't experienced yet in the church. And we have got to come to that place where we begin to be that friend that sticks closer than a brother, because this world's going to need that kind of net to fall into. It's going to be a great time of evangelism. But it's going to be a great time of evangelism because it's going to get crazy. Things are going to be crazy. I'm glad there's a lot of things going our way. You think the devil's liking that? He is not. And he's going to bring his share of stuff, right? To be a friend that sticks closer to a brother, that means to be a sister, closer than a sister even, right? To encourage you to stay planted, to encourage you to stay faithful, to encourage you to continue to produce the oil of the Lord. I pray that for each and every one of you, a friend in your life that sticks with you through thick and thin. You need that for 2025. You need that as you hold steadfast, producing the oil of the Lord right where you're at. I pray that you have that. But if you do not have that friend, they may just be sitting right here in this room today. So, what are you waiting on? Start getting to know the people around here. You ever called someone that you used to see here and you haven't seen them in a while? Have you ever called them? Often people say, well, no one ever called, so I assumed it didn't matter. It didn't count. There is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. I got to meet one of mine this week at coffee. First time I've ever had coffee with that person. But I'm telling you, you need that. Not only do you need that, you need to be that friend that sticks closer to a brother. Let's pray. Father, I'm asking you to help us as we come into this new year, as we begin to cast vision for what you want for 2025, for this house, for our homes, for our relationships, for our children. God, I'm praying that you would take us to a place to where we could take what I said today and be planted, to be productive, producing oil, and have purpose. Your purpose, clearly walked out. And that's going to involve locking arms, linking with others, being the net that someone might need to fall into. I'm asking you to help us do that. Give us vision, give us eyes of faith to see what you're doing in our lives. In Jesus' mighty name I pray. Amen.